Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ballhawk Sports Podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I appreciate it. And today on episode 3, we're going to delve into the NFL free agency and all the deals and trades that have been made over roughly the last week, with the tampering period starting at noon last Monday. Now, just to start us off, anyone that was cut prior to the tampering period starting could have signed a contract. It's not uncommon for players who were cut to start negotiating with teams prior to that. It's similar to if a player was cut during the season. I mean, it's not a big deal at all. Players typically do normally wait, or teams wait, just because they are subject to different cap restrictions under those situations, or they just have their contracts dated to the new league year on the 12th, as they do during the tampering period. But it's not uncommon. And it's not something you typically see, but there are some players that were cut out there that we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, other things to look at before the tampering period started was franchise tag. Now, normally this is a very popular way for teams to be able to keep their players that they can't sign or don't want to sign at this time, but want to keep them on the team for another year. This year, we only had 2 players get franchise tag. That was guard Trey Smith from the Kansas City Chiefs. His tag was valued at $23.4 million. And then wide receiver T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. It was his second straight year getting tagged, and that tag is valued at $26.3 million. Now, players that are tagged for a second year, they do get an increase on their allotment. Typically, a tag is a mix of the percentages of the top 5 highest contracts at the position. It's typically where the point gets, but you get a little bit of a boost if you're on your second year getting tagged, which T. Higgins is. And then the other thing about the pre-tampering period is if you have 3 years of accrued time in the NFL and an expiring contract, you are subject to restricted free agency. Typically, this only comes into consideration for players who are undrafted because they get signed to 3-year contracts if they make the team out of camp, or they just get given a contract and are able to play it out. The only player of note for that the situation this year is Jaylen Warren, who was given a second-round tender by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, these tenders, they do relate to a set money margin. It also relates to basically the trade value of that player. So if someone were to go out and sign Jaylen Warren and the Steelers choose to not match that offer, they would owe the Steelers a second-round pick. Now, they also could just flat out negotiate a trade and say, hey, we don't want to pay a second-round pick, but we'll give you a third and a seventh, and you let us sign Warren, or you sign Warren and then just trade him to us. Something that happens a lot more often in NBA, not something that happens in football frequently. But it is something to note because it is always a possibility. Now, getting into the moves that happened over the last few days, it was a lot of big signings. I want to start with one of the biggest signings of note, which was Josh Allen re-signing with the Bills for 6 years and $330 million. Now, similar to the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, Allen didn't break the bank. He didn't get all the money that he probably could or should have. Players of this ilk, they understand their national brand. Josh Allen's going to make plenty of money from advertising sales and other venues other than football that he doesn't need to tie down the team in the cap situation, which also allowed them very quickly to re-sign wide receiver Khalil Shakir, edge rusher Greg Rousseau, linebacker Terrell Bernard, and sign free agent Joey Bosa. Now, the 3 re-signings are really of note because Shakir was the leading receiver for the Bills last season out of the slot. Greg Rousseau is their best pass rusher, and Terrell Bernard, while he was hurt last year, is a big off-ball linebacker for them. If you think back to the Terrell Edmond days of Buffalo a few years back, he was that replacement that came in and had a really good year 2 years ago and was having a good season before he ended up missing the rest of the year with an injury. And getting Bosa to go with the defense basically just replaces the Von Miller role after he was released earlier this offseason. see it really as a 1-to-1. I mean, Miller was really just a strictly pass rusher coming onto the field on pass rush down. So it would not be out of the realm of possibility to see Joey Bosa fill a similar role, which also should help him stay healthy, which has been part of the issues that he's had, and really a big part of the reason why Los Angeles Chargers decided that he was too expensive for them and released him. Now, the other big story coming into free agency period was the Myles Garrett situation. Now, Myles Garrett very publicly requested a trade prior to the Super Bowl, saying that he wanted to play with a contender and didn't want to play with Cleveland. Now, Cleveland heard that and decided, you know what, we want to make you a Brown for life, so here's a lot of money. They gave him a 4-year, $160 million contract, to which Garrett signed. And decided that he doesn't need to play for a winner when he's getting $40 million a year, which is the most for any non-quarterback ever in the history of the league, and considerably more. I mean, this is a shift in the landscape of the NFL if other teams follow suit, which will be very interesting to see over the next few years as guys like Micah Parsons or do contracts. Trey Hendrickson as well, who's currently negotiating with the Bengals and also has been allowed to go and look for a trade if one's out there. But I don't think there's going to be one out there with him needing a contract extension and needing to give up picks. I think teams are going to be perfectly fine to just let the situation play out a little bit. And hopefully the Bengals are able to resolve that for the sake of their team, because their defense did not have a good year last year. Moving on to the Patriots spending spree. They came into the offseason with the absolute most cap space, and they used it. They really buffed up their defense and their offensive line a little bit. They signed former Philadelphia Eagle nose tackle Milton Williams to a 4-year, $104 million deal. Former edge rusher from the Tennessee Titans, Harold Landry, to a 3-year, $43.5 million deal, which is of note because Landry had his best years when new Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel was with the Titans. So hopefully he's able to recover some of that oomph in his game. They signed off-ball linebacker Robert Spillane from the Raiders to a 3-year, $37 million contract, and cornerback Carlton Davis away from the Detroit Lions for a 3-year, $60 million contract. Now, those are the additions they made on their defense. It should really help them, specifically in the run game. One of the things that I think is a little interesting about this is Carlton Davis leaving the Lions didn't have the best of seasons last year. He had a great year 2 years ago, but he was kind of only slightly above average, so I think it's a little bit of a higher price tag. Now, obviously, being in free agency and going to a team that doesn't have the best of outlooks for the upcoming season typically means you got to pay a little bit more for players. And they had, I think it was like around $122 million to spend in free agency, so it's not like they're saving money or needing to save money to sign anyone. I mean, they got a good player at a higher than needed price, and that's not a horrible thing when you have money to spend. But the Lions did replace him by signing DJ Reed to a 3-year, $48 million contract. If you look at the raw numbers, DJ Reed played better last year than Carlton Davis, and the Lions got him for cheaper than what Carlton Davis would have cost to re-sign. I think it's one of those things that good teams do, is they don't hold on to players that get too expensive. The Patriots under Bill Belichick were notorious for this. I mean, when you saw them let a player go, you knew that they were either shot, completely done, or like they had gotten too old, or that they were going to be too expensive and were going to be a liability because of that price tag. You can't sign middling players to great deals, even if you have cap space. I mean, just look at the Browns cap situation, the Saints cap situation, some other minor teams with cap issues like the Giants, also just not in good situations because they spent money where they shouldn't have. And, rewarding your players is great, don't get me wrong. You want to reward your own players. It doesn't look good to anyone in the league if you're not someone who re-signs your players when they perform well for you. But that doesn't mean that you should just, throw money around and be like, oh, the cap doesn't exist. The cap does exist, and there are teams that are in bad situations because they just they spent where they didn't need to. So hopefully for the Patriots and Patriots fans, this money turns out to be well spent, and these players are able to help them try to get back to the playoffs this season. One of the bigger trades that was made was DK Metcalf getting sent from the Seahawks to the Steelers, and then immediately signing a 5-year, $130 million extension. The Hawks got a second-rounder back in this upcoming draft. They were looking for a first. Obviously, there wasn't a first-round pick offered out there. I think the finalists were the Chargers and the Steelers, which is just a little funny because DK, in his preferences, wanted a good quarterback or a stable quarterback situation and warm weather. The Chargers would have provided that, and the Steelers definitely do not provide that. Their only quarterback on roster right now is Mason Rudolph, who they just re-signed to be a backup. And Pittsburgh is just not a warm place to play. It's a really interesting destination. I don't necessarily understand why Pittsburgh was willing to pay $30 million a year for the next 5 years for DK. Slight injury, soft tissue issues, which is not necessarily surprising for a guy that had that is as big and as buff as DK is. No, he is an athletic freak. Top line speed, top of the line jumping, and really good route running as he's developed. And while he hasn't had a season under 900 yards yet in his career, Steelers don't have a quarterback. They don't have a quarterback. They already have a good receiver of a similar ilk in George Pickens. Now, Metcalf has some drama that comes with him, but Pickens has shown that he's a lot more. So I wouldn't be surprised if Pickens doesn't get re-signed or even gets traded if the Steelers do end up drafting a receiver and Pickens starts to bark about a lack of targets or not getting an extension or anything like that. The Seahawks did come back, and they went out and signed Cooper Kupp to a 3-year, $45 million contract to replace DK Metcalf. Now, I know some people are probably looking at that and going, well, why would they make that change? Why would they make that swap? Look, Kupp is a good receiver who gets hurt a lot, and that contract is cheaper. Now, granted, Kupp is, I believe, 4 years older than Metcalf is. Now you have Kupp, who will be a good number 2 behind Jackson Smith and Jigba, who had a breakout season last year, and will also be a good mentor for him. Now, you got to think of it as they were able to get Kupp to replace Metcalf, which if Kupp stays healthy, I think Kupp could outperform how Metcalf performs this upcoming season. But at the end of the day, they got a second-round pick out of this. It's not necessarily it's a deep running receiver class. There's not a lot of top-end talent. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, the Seahawks drafted Metcalf in the second round. It's not outside the realm of possibility that they could do the same thing again. So look out for that, and look out for Cooper Kupp making some plays out there in Seattle. Staying with the Seahawks, they did another swap of players, which I'm a big fan of for this offseason. They traded Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders for a third this year, and then signed Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100.5 million contract. Now, I will preface this by saying I don't like what Darnold looked like at the end of the season. It really looked like the pressure got to him. I mean, to just completely shit the bed at the end of his last season with everything on the line for your team. I mean, looking to win the division, get the top seed, get a bye, and then in the first round of the playoffs, after you can't beat Detroit, you just let a young Rams defense just run all over you and just completely destroy you offensively, and don't look good. I mean, Darnold did not look good those last 2 games. He looked good most of the season. You know, he's very deserving of the praises and the flowers and the contract that he was just given, but not a great note to leave the Minnesota Vikings fans on. Speaking of the Minnesota Vikings fans, what they're doing at quarterback is what I expected. I did think that they would bring in someone like re-signing Daniel Jones to push J.J. McCarthy a little bit, but that was going to be what they did. kind of not really the opposite of what happened with San Francisco when they had drafted Lance and then Lance got hurt and they ended up going with Brock Purdy, who's done a very good job for them in San Francisco, but has his limitations. And I think you'll see with that contract that he ends up signing with San Francisco if he doesn't get franchise tag next offseason, which might be where it trends to, especially if Purdy has a good year this year, at least better than last year. Donald had limitations. Purdy had limitations. The Niners decided, you know what, we'll take the cheap option and we'll stick with Purdy, pay everyone else, and hopefully we'll get a win out of it. Now, they got to the Super Bowl, weren't able to win it, unfortunately for them, and now they're paying the repercussions of that, needing to cut a lot of good players because they have to prepare for that Purdy extension. The Vikings, a little bit different situation. If they would have re-signed Darnold, they don't have the luxury of having a cheap quarterback. You know, they don't get to re-sign a bunch of guys. So they chose to go with J.J. McCarthy after drafting him last year's draft in the first round. I agree with that decision. I think McCarthy coming in before he got hurt should have sat all year anyway. I thought he was a little bit raw as a quarterback prospect, despite what he had done at Michigan, which I think he did great things at Michigan. But I think he benefited from sitting. I mean, look what Kevin O'Connell did with Sam Darnold. You think that he can't do that with a consensus top 10 quarterback pick from last year? I mean, look at last year's quarterback class. You're telling me that the guy that O'Connell handpicked basically isn't going to be able to succeed? I think that he'll be able to be successful. I don't think that there's going to be a problem there. It'll just be whether he's fully recovered injury-wise, and if they do end up signing like a Jameis Winston to come into camp, push McCarthy a little bit, maybe even have him sit for a few weeks. It's not necessarily a bad thing if that happens for Vikings fans. Staying on the Vikings, they signed some offensive line help for McCarthy, whoever ends up quarterbacking for him, signing Will Freeze, a guard from Indianapolis, to a 4-year, $88 million contract. They also got some defensive boost with a 3-year, $51 million contract for Jonathan Allen, defensive tackle, and re-signing cornerback Byron Murphy to a 3-year, $54 million contract. Now, what the Vikings have done, just kind of teetering on the edges. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft. Now, they don't have a lot of picks, which is not great when you're looking at improving on a season from last year. But they also brought back Aaron Jones. They just acquired Jordan Mason, running back from the 49ers, to kind of spell Jones, who's over 30 now. So we'll see where they go, but I think that some regression is in store for them. Moving on to another team that was very active in the trade market, is Laramie Tunsil being moved from the Texans to the Commanders with a 4th-round pick. The Commanders received a 3rd and 7th-round pick in this year's draft and a 2nd and 4th in next year's draft. Really interesting to see them move off Tunsil, who I know is due a contract at the end of next season, but when you have a quarterback under a rookie deal, you want a great tackle or offensive lineman with them. I mean, it doesn't bode well for them to not have a left tackle now in Houston, but it bodes really well for the Commanders to have Tunsil on the left side, protecting Jaden Daniels' blind side. The Commanders also went out and traded a 2025 5th to the Niners to be able to get Deebo Samuel. I am indifferent on that trade. I think a 5th for Deebo is good value, but is he going to be able to be what he was? No. He was never a great route runner. He never had top-end speed. He was very much like a Anquan Bolden, A.J. Brown light out there in San Francisco, and I think that what Kyle Shanahan was able to do with Deebo was more of a product of Shanahan realizing what Deebo was and being able to take advantage of that. So we'll see if Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator in Washington, can do the same thing with Samuel. Going back to Vegas, as I kind of glanced over this, but I think Dan McClure and Geno Smith was unnecessary. I think it's very clear nowadays in the NFL, you need a superstar quarterback to be able to compete and make the playoffs. I think it's very obvious, especially in that division in the West, where you have Kansas City, where you have the Chargers and the Broncos with quarterbacks that, the Broncos, we'll see if Knicks can continue it, but I liked him last year. I like what he did. But in Herbert and Mahomes, those are top-end quarterbacks, and Vegas is going to go into next season with Geno Smith, who's, replacement level. He's better than a backup, but they also signed him, or they have him for a few more years. I think that if that's what they were going to do, they could have just signed Sam Darnold. But here's the thing. I don't know if Sam Darnold would have gone there. And I think that's why the deal happened. Because I can't see a logical reason to give up a third-round pick when you're trying to build a contender and you need these young players to get a quarterback who's, a starter, sure, but not a top-end starter. I don't know if I would put him top 15 in quarterbacks for next year. So I don't know, kind of just like a meh move. Didn't really love it. Hopefully they follow that up by drafting a developmental quarterback like a Jalen Milroe or a Jackson Dart in the draft, and they're able to have him sit for a year or two behind Geno and hopefully show off what's going to happen, or show off the talent and the progression that guys like Jordan Love have in the past few years. Moving on to the defending champs, the Eagles rewarded Saquon Barkley to a 2-year, $41.5 million contract extension, as well as re-signing inside linebacker Zach Bond to a 3-year, $51 million contract, and trading safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson to the Texans for a 2026 pick swap. Starting off with the trade, that's really just a salary dump. There's no reason to be paying a safety like that. And you have other guys you need to pay, especially when you have young guys to replace him. The safety Sidney Brown, he looked good. I'm sure that they'll be able to draft someone or find someone else who can play a similar role to what C.J. Gardner-Johnson did. Good player, but they're paying guys out there. They lost players because you can't pay everyone. The Chiefs, you could argue, lost that Super Bowl because they couldn't pay everyone and keep the guys that they would have liked to. I'm sure they would love to have Tyreek Hill, but that was a decision that needed to be made, where they had to move off of him. And that's just, when you're winning and you're a good team, those are decisions you have to make. Don't worry, the Lions fans will be in for that in a few years soon. But the re-signing of Zach Bond was really nice. They fit their system really well. What Vic Fangio is doing over there, really good to see a kind of a career special teamer, replacement level player, go to a new team after he left New Orleans, and be able to be successful, and then get rewarded for it as well. And then Saquon Barkley getting a running back paid that kind of money. He's even said it in interviews since he signed that extension. He hopes that guys pass him, like Bijan Robinson, James Cook, Jahmyr Gibbs. He hopes that they get contracts that are bigger than his. Like he signed this extension understanding this is going to get beaten, and that's okay. And I think that there are a lot of players in position groups that aren't getting paid as much as you'd think. Like, if you go back to last season, Barkley is the reason they won. Without Saquon Barkley, they don't win the Super Bowl. I don't even know if they make the Super Bowl, let alone win it. So, as much flowers as you want to give Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, and especially that defense was really good last year, really came into their own as a group towards the end of the season and into the playoffs. Without Saquon, they don't get past LA when the Rams were playing them in the division round. They don't get past them, and they don't beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. I don't think. The Chiefs weren't built to play Barkley. I know Barkley didn't have the greatest of games, but the Chiefs really sold out to stop him, and that allowed Hurts to go off a little bit. and the passing game to go off a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. You game plan to win. That's it. You game plan to win. That's all you care about, is winning the game at the end of the day. So Eagles are doing what they can with what they have, and you got to trust Harry Roseman out there to put together a good team and continue to draft really well. The draft class they had last year was impressive. They really addressed their holes with the best players that they could get, and it helped them win. Moving on to the NFC North, where the Chicago Bears making some offensive line moves. I think the thing to note before I get into the actual moves is Ben Johnson learned from Dan Campbell. I mean, he understands what it takes to develop a quarterback and to make them successful. Something that Dan Campbell obviously did very well in reviving Jared Goff's career with the help of Ben Johnson and the rest of the offensive staff. You got to protect him. One of Caleb Williams' biggest flaws coming out of college was that he was a little trigger happy with the ball, meaning he would throw the ball into contested territory, and he was always trying to make the big play, meaning that he was always scrambling around in the backfield, which is perfectly fine when you're the best athlete on the field and you're running around with a bunch of college kids, but that's not how the NFL works. There are very few players that can do that, especially as rookies coming right into the league, and especially every play. I mean, just look back to Joe Burrow needing to do that. He's had some injury issues because of that. Andrew Luck retired early because he got hurt so much from doing that kind of thing and not having a good offensive line. So the Bears have invested in protecting Caleb Williams, which I think will help him take the next step in Ben Johnson's system. So they acquired Joe Thuney, guard from the Kansas City Chiefs, for a 2025 fourth. This year's draft, they also acquired Jonah Jackson, who's a guard that kind of fell out of favor in LA last year for the Rams, for a 6th-round pick this year, and then signed center Drew Dahlman to a 3-year, $48 million contract to play center. So they basically have fixed the interior of their line, which is really important for them, and should be a big help to Caleb Williams coming into next season. Now the Cardinals signed Josh Sweat to a 4-year, $76.4 million contract. Another one of the Philadelphia Eagle guys getting rewarded. The Cardinals really badly need front seven help. So getting Josh Sweat is a big boost for them. Look for them to also possibly draft like an interior guy in the early rounds of the draft. But staying in the NFC, going to the Packers, signing guard Aaron Banks to a 4-year, $77 million contract, helping them in the interior of their offensive line. Going over to the AFC, where you had some big contracts. In Denver, they signed linebacker Dre Greenlaw to a 3-year, $35 million contract, and safety Talanoa Hufanga to a 3-year, $45 million contract. Both of those guys hurt last year, hurt the year before, got injury issues. I don't know. If they stay on the field healthy, especially Hufanga being a little younger than Dre Greenlaw is, they should be able to have success. We'll see how it actually works out for them. They're an interesting team where I think that they're in a good spot, not a great spot as a franchise. Obviously, anyone in the Chiefs division, especially with the Chargers also there, not in a great spot. So we'll see how those work out. I think their draft is a lot more important than anything they're going to do in free agency. And getting Evan Ingram as well was a good boost, although injury issues there as well. So hopefully this team can just stay healthy. The Titans signed left tackle Dan Moore to a 4-year, $82 million contract. I think that's an overpay for a, average or a league average left tackle. He gave up, I think it was 12 sacks last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, yeah, it's an upgrade over what they have, but that's a lot of money to give to a guy that probably won't be worth it in the long run. Going over to the Chiefs signing Charvarius Ward, cornerback from the Niners, and Cameron Bynum, safety from the Vikings. Those are needed upgrades. The Colts needed some defensive back help. So that's not very surprising. The number for Bynum is high, not for Bynum. The number for Ward is high. The number for Bynum is understandable. $15 million a year for a safety of his caliber is good. Travarius Ward, a little old, a little injured, a little underperformance. I mean, a little underwhelming for $20 million a year. I think there's name value there that affects how he gets or how he got paid. That was a little bit of a head scratcher for me. But they also signed Daniel Jones to a 1-year, $14 million contract. What that number tells me is that he's going to have a chance to start. I don't know if that's what they would prefer. I was a big Anthony Richardson fan coming out of college. I still am a fan of his, with the caveat being his accuracy issues haven't been fixed. But he's a dynamic player when he has the ball in his hands, kind of similar to Justin Fields, who we'll talk about next. Whereas Anthony Richardson he can be a player. He's got some Josh Allen, some Lamar Jackson in his game. He just needs to make that switch like Josh Allen did. And truthfully, I don't know if the Colts are gonna be able to bring it out of him. But guys have shown, even if they can't succeed at their first stop, or they get given up on at their first stop, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, that doesn't end their career. They could go somewhere else and succeed. You could see Richardson getting beat out of camp, getting traded, or just having to sit and then go somewhere else. It's not outside the realm of possibility. If you're a Colts fan, though, you just want one of them to be successful. It doesn't really matter who. But as a Giants fan myself, I don't think that Daniel Jones is their answer to taking that next step in the AFC. Staying in the AFC, the Baltimore Ravens re-signed Ronnie Stanley to a 3-year, $60 million contract. This is important for the Ravens because they need a left tackle. So getting Stanley back is a good thing. I think Lamar Jackson needs as much protection as possible. But Stanley is over 30 now, and he's had some injury issues start to pop up. So I don't know if it'll end up as a good contract. He might end up getting cut by the end of it. It isn't a long contract, but he's also potentially not long for continuing playing in this league at the level that $20 million a year would command. Now getting to Justin Fields, the Jets signed him to a 2-year, $40 million contract. I like this signing as long as they give him run. I liked him going to the Steelers last year until they benched him, and then continued to bench him. And then they started losing, and they continued to bench him. It's one thing to bench a player for bad performance, but I don't think Fields performed badly. He was winning for them. They were playing well. He adds a different element that I think a team like Pittsburgh that wants to run the ball and play good defense needs, but I don't blame him for not wanting to go back. I mean, if the report comes out that he didn't want to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, the reports are currently that he did want to, that the Steelers preferred to bring him back. But you got to think about it like as a human being. You get traded for team, you come into a team and they're all behind you. We support you. We think that you're going to be great. We're looking forward to you being our quarterback. Great stuff. Keep moving, do what you got to do. He comes in, does what he has to do, stays healthy. Wilson gets hurt. He gets kind of not really handed the starting job, and then he wins. He plays well and he wins. That's what you want. Like, you want to win. That's great. He didn't do much winning in Chicago. He was doing some winning in Pittsburgh. And then Wilson gets healthy, and their true intentions were shown. They wanted Wilson to start. They wanted Wilson to play. I understand what they might have seen in Wilson. A Super Bowl winning quarterback. with that background very appealing to some teams. I don't think they were the team. And clearly it showed. He ended up breaking down a little bit in his performance as the season went on, and they never pulled the trigger to go back to Fields, which might have got him to re-sign. I don't know. But I don't blame Justin Fields at all for not re-signing. I wouldn't have re-signed with the Steelers either if it was me. But on the Jets situation, they have good weapons to surround Fields with. They got him for more than others, but not a lot of money. I mean, quarterbacks are getting $62 million just for being a Dallas Cowboy. I mean, it's not a bad thing to pay only $20 million for a quarterback to, say, prove it to me. Show me that you could be a quarterback. My only issue here comes if potentially, and this isn't reported or anything, this is just speculation, Shedeur Sanders falls to them at their pick at 7 and they take him. Then I'm like, why are you signing Fields? Obviously, that's not expected to happen, but if that happens and you're set to take him, you're like, oh, if he's here, then we're going to take him. Then why are you signing Fields? You're sinking money. I would think that Fields got told that he's going to be the starter, or at least a strong competition for it. I mean, they could draft Jalen Milroe and have two of the same quarterback back there and, give Fields the run, let him, teach Milroe, and then maybe hand it over next season or something like that. But I like the Fields signing. I like Justin Fields still. I think that he's still got more to prove. I don't love that he's going to another defensive coach. I would have liked if he went to a offensive coach who could have tried to develop him better. But we will see what Aaron Glenn can do. He came from a really good system in Detroit that set him up for success and set their quarterback up for success. Hopefully Glenn and his offensive staff can do the same despite Glenn's defensive background. One big thing of note for this free agency period overall, the quarterback carousel. It's not a good year to need a quarterback, as shown by what guys had to do. I mean, there's two guys at the top of the draft that, if I'm being honest, if you were to take the last 3 drafts, you probably don't have a top 10 pick. Maybe not even a top 20 pick at quarterback. There's an argument to be made that Ward's potential, if you knew what you knew overall going into each draft, would have ended up probably as a top 20 pick just because quarterbacks get pushed up like that. But the only good thing about Shedeur Sanders, from what I've seen, is that he's taken a lot of hits. You like to see that as a young kid. You like to see him be able to respond and come back and take the blame. He's also shown some personality. I don't want to say flaws because they're not exactly flaws, but like thorn bushes, I guess, where like they might annoy you, especially if he's not playing well. If he's playing good, then it's just confidence. If he's not playing well, then it's cockiness, and that's what you don't want out of your quarterback, especially. You want some humbleness to him. But I also his accuracy is good. His arm strength is average. I don't know. I don't see first round quarterback out of him, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But getting back into the carousel, I mean, you see Geno Smith go to the Raiders. You see Darnold go to the Seahawks. You see Daniel Jones go to the Colts. Justin Fields go to the Jets. And then you see Aaron Rodgers not being able to choose a team. I mean, there was a report that came out the other day that he, instead of choosing the Steelers or the Giants, if the Vikings don't want him, that he would just retire. Now, seeing how Rodgers has acted, I don't agree with that. I think that he looks at what's going on in New York for the Giants and goes, I've already dealt with that media. They don't look like a good team. Why would I, at over 40 years old, subject myself to that? So I understand that. Not wanting to go to Pittsburgh, I don't know. Does he Does he want to win? There's a chance. I mean, that division's really good. So, but he just got more weapons potentially if he goes to Pittsburgh. They did just lose a running back, so we'll see what happens there. As Najee Harris went to the Chargers, who's a great fit for that offense, by the way. But I don't know. I don't know if the Vikings want him because if they have him, they really can't play McCarthy unless Rodgers were to get hurt, which you never hope someone gets hurt. So I think they want to roll with JJ. If they were to sign Rodgers, then they just can't. They can't. They have to play Rodgers. I mean, I don't think, especially with the headache that he is as a person, that you can just sit Rodgers and be like, oh, well, we're fine. We're not. It'll be fine. We can bench him after 8 weeks, and we're 6-2 because JJ's ready and he's healthy and he's fine. Like that's not going to go over well with him at all. But we'll see what happens there. As of recording this, nothing's been decided with him. And then poor Russell Wilson waiting for Rodgers to make his decision so that he can go to the team that's left over in Pittsburgh or New York. I do think if Rodgers does go to Minnesota, Russell Wilson ends up back in Pittsburgh, and they probably draft a guy. I could see them being a spot for Jalen Milroe if they really wanted. Fields because of the type of player he is. I think that getting Milroe and doing something similar to what the Eagles did, getting him into the system, having him learn it, potentially continue to play and improve, is a good thing and can be good for him as a player, Milroe, and potentially the Steelers as an organization. But that's what we have for free agency so far. I'm sure some more moves will get. We'll get through some more moves over the next coming weeks. There's still a lot of good players out there that haven't been signed, which we'll recap as they happen. But really, teams improving, things looking good for some teams. Teams that have to spend are spending. Teams are re-signing their players where they need to. It's a good year. It's been a good start to the league year for a lot of teams. Not so good for some other teams, but that's football. That's free agency. That's how it goes. So thank you guys for joining us. Please, if you liked it, give us a follow. We'll have another episode on NFL coming out next week. Unless there's a lot of moves happening, it'll probably be draft focused. And our MLB baseball episodes come out every Thursday. So thanks for joining us, and I will see you next week.